What's up, everyone? Welcome back to my channel. Today, I want to talk about transgender athletes. I'm letting you know ahead of time this video will be longer than normal because there's a lot to talk about. Everything from biology and biological advantages to fairness and equality, as well as the importance and value of sports. Now, I really hope and plead with you that you watch the entire video, even if you need to break it up into segments and watch it a little at a time, because hopefully this video will answer all of your questions, fears, and doubts regarding trans athletes. And also, unfortunately, this is a big topic in the country right now. As of April 22nd, there have been 144 anti-trans bills introduced across 33 states. 4 months, almost 150 bills just toward the trans community. Roughly half of those bills, 69, are focused on trans athletes. And by trans athletes, I'm talking about kids, everywhere from middle school up to college. 40 of those bills are focused on trans healthcare, again, primarily focused toward youth. The rest of those bills have to do with bathroom access, birth certificates and legal documents, as well as allowing or requiring teachers to dead name or out their trans students. If you follow my social media, you'll know that I talk about sports a lot, especially basketball. You can see my little basketball right back there. That's my passion. I even did a video at BuzzFeed where I talked about how it's my dream to one day try out for the WNBA. And because of these things, I get asked hundreds, if not thousands of questions regarding trans athletes. I get messaged all the time. While many of those are supportive and encouraging, there are also those that are extremely hateful, some that even threaten my life. Others are on the fence, meaning they want to support the community, but they have questions. They have some doubts or fears because of the headlines they see or rhetoric they hear. And by headlines, I'm talking about those clickbait, sensationalized media headlines that are there to do nothing but evoke an emotional response, such as fear or anger, or to drive a deeper divide between people. Headlines such as, transgender MMA fighter breaks female opponent's skull. Is it now okay for a man to hit a woman? Actually a male. Transgender weightlifter stripped of world records. Biological male is top-ranked NCAA women's track star. And not only are these headlines misleading, they're crafted in a way to create a negative bias toward the trans community, which further endangers our lives. Year after year, we see more trans women murdered, specifically Black and brown trans women, because of headlines like these, because of the stigma that's created. It also leads to unnecessary legislation. 144 bills in 4 months. Can even go back to 2016 and 2017 with the bathroom bills. If you don't know what I'm talking about, 19 states in 2016, 16 states in 2017 introduced bills that would ban trans people from using public restrooms unless they matched their gender assigned at birth. Headlines such as, Ted Cruz on transgender bathroom issue. It opens the door for predators. I can't tell you how many times around those years I saw and heard rhetoric calling trans people predators. I even received personal messages in my inbox from people saying, I know the area you live in, and if I ever see you go near the women's restroom, I'll kill you. Years later, we see a few bathroom bills still being introduced, but for the most part, they were defeated. One passed and got defeated. A lot of wasted time, energy, and money. All to finally realize, at least it seems so for most people, that trans individuals are just going to the bathroom to pee. Just like anyone else, that's what it's for. The headlines today are creating that same type of problem. The messages I get in my inbox have changed a little bit. The threats are still there, but they've changed as far as their wording. Now, instead of calling me a predator or a pervert, I'm constantly reminded of the gender I was assigned at birth. By that I mean I'm constantly hearing, well, you're biologically a man. I think I said that a few times in those headlines I showed you. And I'm told because of how I was born, that I inherently have some kind of advantage that makes me bigger, faster, stronger, and just better at everything than a cis woman. And by cisgender, I mean not trans. You identify as the gender assigned at birth. But let's talk about biology. Since that's constantly brought up to me, let's look at that. I'm going to take a little bit of a deep dive into how biology works in sports. To start, I'm not going to talk about the transgender athletes just yet. I'm going to talk about the sports world as we know it. And I'm going to start with men's sports. Athletes like Michael Phelps. If you don't know who he is, he's basically a human fish, or you could probably call him an Olympic god. He has 28 Olympic medals, 23 of them being gold. It's not unknown that he has advantages. His body produces half the lactic acid as his competitors. That means his muscles take longer to get tired, so he can endure longer. He's double jointed at the ankles, the elbows, the shoulders, long torso, short legs, long wingspan. All of those things combined allow him to move through the water with more ease and at a faster pace. All biological advantages, but we're okay with it. Another athlete, Miguel and Durian, is a cyclist in the 90s with 5 consecutive Tour de France wins. He has a resting heart rate of 28 beats per minute. If you know anything about biology or the sports world, that's insane. Try to get your heart rate as low as you can and test it and see where it is. The average person is 60 to 72 beats per minute. He also has a lung capacity of 7.8 liters and the average person is 6. Both of those things combined allow his heart and lungs to be more rested during the difficult stages of the Tour de France, giving him a biological advantage. Now, if we look at Yero Monterranta, he's a cross-country skier, competed in 4 Winter Olympics and earned 7 Olympic medals. He has a body mutation that led to an increased red blood cell count, which has increased his oxygen carrying capacity by 25 to 50%. It's the equivalent of doping, which we all know is illegal in sports. What that did is allowed his body to endure longer. It's an advantage, biological advantage. Let's look at Shaquille O'Neal. Shaq, 7'1", 294 pounds at his leanest. He's a large human being. It allowed him to dominate the game, unlike few have ever done. But that biological advantage alone doesn't make him great. I know people who are 7 foot tall and can't play basketball to save their life. And they could literally just put the ball in the goal without even jumping. And they can't, nor do they want to. I'm sure there are athletes out there that, not even athletes, I'm sure there are individuals out there with resting heart rates around what Miguel had, or their bodies produce half the lactic acid like Michael Phelps. The difference with these guys is they found their passion and they put their hard work, time, training, and just desire to win behind those advantages to allow them to succeed. And because they're men, we don't care about the advantages. It's perfectly fine. We praise their achievements. But if we look at women's sports, it's a little different. We'll start with Simone Biles. If you don't know her, she's arguably one of the greatest, if not the greatest gymnast ever. She has 30 world and Olympic medals. She's also a 5-time world all-around champion. She's so good, in fact, that they've recently told her she needs to dumb down her routines a little bit because some of her skills are too difficult for her competitors to perform or even try because it could cause them injury. So because she's better, she has to dial it back. I don't know if you know how gymnastics are scored, but for each skill, you're given a letter, which correlates to a number. So A equals 1, B equals 2, and so on and so forth. So if she chooses to still perform these routines, they're going to give her a lower score on those skills. So if she were to perform a skill that's difficult that would normally get, like, say, a E grade, they'll give her a B. How's that fair? Another athlete, Dutee Chand, is the first female Indian to win a gold medal in the 100-meter race in a global competition. Talented track star. In 2014, she was told she couldn't compete in the Olympics due to hyperandrogenism. The rule was, if you produce too much testosterone or androgens, you have to take blockers to compete. And androgens are the group of sex hormones that give men their male characteristics. And I say it like that because clearly cisgender females have androgens and can have high levels. Same thing with testosterone. Well, she challenged this ruling, and in 2015 she won. It opened the door for these athletes to be able to compete without taking blockers. Along comes Castro Semenya, South African middle distance runner who won 2 Olympic gold medals. Now in her testing, because they test all athletes like that for doping, she produced a lot of testosterone. So that led to inappropriate and unnecessary sex verification tests, which proved she's a cisgender female. And they said, well, okay, so that's not fair then to your competitors. So we're going to reverse this ruling and go back and say you have to take blockers. So essentially what we're saying is in men's sports, there's no box, there's no boundary, just compete. But in women's sports, you must be in a box. You must stay right here. Even though that we see biology shows everybody varies, body types are different. It's now known that Castro Semenya is an intersex female athlete. World Athletics have found in a decade of research that 7 in 1,000 elite female athletes are intersex. So they have testosterone levels naturally around the range of men, cis men. All this shows is that gender isn't binary. We take science and gender, and we hear statements all the time. We see politicians state it that there's man and woman. That's it. Sex chromosomes, however, are X and Y. And there's so many different variances of that. Having a Y chromosome doesn't necessarily mean male. There's XXY, XYY, XXX, XO, and so on and so forth. Several different variances. Roughly 2% of the population is born intersex. All of this leads to different body hormone developments. People are different. I share all this to just show that biology isn't black and white. So no matter how much you try to put people in a little box, someone's always going to be better, stronger, taller, faster. They're going to want it more. They're going to put more hard work into it, more training, more dedication, more talent. Now, how does this correlate with trans athletes? So I'm always hearing that trans athletes have an advantage because of testosterone or lung capacity or heart size or bone density or hand and feet size. I'm going to focus on testosterone because that's the thing most talked about. I'm going to show you a chart. On this chart is the blood testosterone levels for 676 Olympic level elite athletes. The top chart is men, the bottom chart is women. So you can see on the top chart, testosterone levels are all over the place. On the bottom chart, mostly grouped together, but there are some wide variances. It's also important to note that none of these athletes are known to be intersex or have used performance-enhancing drugs. So these are straight up cisgender men and women. It's important to note, number 1 on that top chart, on that men's chart, that's powerlifting. You notice how the testosterone levels are all fairly low. I think you could correlate with that testosterone doesn't necessarily mean strength. If you look at number 7 and number 15, 7 is rowing, 15 is track and field. It's a huge gap between the testosterone levels in both men's and women's. Those are endurance sports, which shows you testosterone doesn't necessarily mean endurance. Now, all of the research studies I've seen on testosterone levels are all different. Some say that testosterone levels equates to slight advantage. Others say little to nothing. For trans athletes, HRT plays into this, hormone replacement therapy. What that does for trans female athletes is it reduces the testosterone levels, redistributes fat, weakens muscles, increases recovery time. It takes me longer to recover after a hard workout now. I actually get injured a lot too. I think it's also important to point out my testosterone level is 0.5 nanomoles per liter. The average cis woman is 0.3 to 2.4. So my body produces less testosterone than most cis female athletes I would compete against. And if we want to talk about the other things like lung capacity or heart size, all people are different. So that could vary in cis women and cis men. But for me, I have severe asthma. I've had to use a steroid inhaler, chronic bronchitis. My lungs aren't great. If we want to talk about bone density, I have 11 breaks on my bones playing sports. So apparently they're not that dense. If we want to talk about hand and feet size, my hands are fairly small. My shoe size is a 10. So when I go to shop for shoes, I can rarely find it in stock because there's a lot of women that wear a size 10. Muscle retention, muscle size. Again, it takes longer for me to recover. HRT actually puts us at a slight disadvantage. But let's dive into these trans athletes. Let's find out. These are the athletes that you constantly hear about in the news, making headlines. So let's talk about their records and see, do they have an advantage? The first athlete I want to talk about is Fallon Fox. She's an MMA fighter. You saw the headline earlier, transgender MMA fighter breaks female opponent's skull. Is it now okay for a man to hit a woman? That's so misleading in so many ways. First of all, stop referring to trans athletes as men, unless it's a trans man. Second, when you hear the word break or fracture a skull, that sounds severe. She broke her orbital bone. If you don't know what that is, that's your eye socket, essentially. Right here, I have a piece of bone missing, cracked out of my orbital bone from playing football. And not like high school or college or pro football. No, just with kids on the playground in 6th grade. I got knocked out. In MMA, breaks and fractures happen all the time, including orbital bone fractures. There was an MMA match in the UK between two cis female fighters where one of them died after the match due to a brain injury sustained during the match. That's sad. But that type of thing happens in that type of sport. It's dangerous. Now, Fallon had a record of 5-1. It's a good record. Dominating would have been she never lost. She did lose to a cisgender female. So I don't know this sports world. I can't really talk about it much. She was good, but can you completely correlate that with her being trans? I don't know that that's a fair assessment. Now, if we jump to another trans athlete, Gregory, transgender powerlifter. The headline earlier said, actually a male, transgender weightlifter, stripped of world records. I had to ask people about this because I know nothing about this world. Powerlifting is grouped by age and weight class. Mary was in what's known as the 100% raw powerlifting federation, which means they don't use straps or anything like that to lift. The chart that I'm going to show you now is some of her numbers. So she was 179 pounds, 44 years old in 2019. These are the numbers that she smashed world records with. Squat, 314 pounds, bench, 233, deadlift, 424. If you look at the very bottom, world records in Mary's weight and age class, all held by Tasha Williams and all higher than Mary's numbers. So how did she smash world records? Now, I've been told she is in a different federation. It's under the Raw Powerlifting Federation. I guess there's different levels or organizations. So she broke it for that specific organization. But the overall Raw Powerlifting Federation, she doesn't hold that world record. And if you do away with age and weight class and then look at the actual world records for raw lifting, her numbers pale in comparison to Christy Hawkins and Allison Hind. I think it's important to note that oftentimes as a society, we equate being female with being weak. Those numbers prove that women are strong. Cis women producing higher numbers than a trans woman who's supposedly smashing records and is supposed to be stronger than them. So you can't really equate being trans with any level of success she had. She doesn't hold the world records. We go to the next athlete, Laurel Hubbard. She's a transgender weightlifter, and she's in the news right now and in headlines because she may become the first trans athlete to ever compete in the Olympics. That's a huge deal. And the reason I say that is because the International Olympic Committee has had a policy in place since 2004 that allows trans athletes to compete. However, 16, 17 years, not a single trans person has ever qualified or won a medal. So if the dominance was there, why aren't we in the Olympics? And Laurel isn't even guaranteed a spot. She currently ranks 16th in the world in her weight and age class for Olympic qualifying. Let's look at her chart. 288 pounds, 39 years old in 2017. She has a snatch of 288 pounds, a clean and jerk of 328. I have no idea what either of those things mean. Some of you may. I'm not into weightlifting. Now, she does currently hold those world records in her age and weight class. It's impressive numbers. However, world records in weightlifting in just her weight class are held by a cis woman, and her numbers dominate Laurel's. Again, she ranks 16th in the world in her weight class for Olympic qualifying. Yet she also holds the world records. So just because she has those world records doesn't mean she's doing those numbers every time and producing wins. Is she strong? Yeah, of course. Not necessarily because she's trans. Again, there's another cis woman that's stronger than her. Another trans athlete, Rachel Mckinnon, transgender cyclist. She really broke into the headlines in 2019. She broke the record for the 200 meter in her age category and won a medal. Not an Olympic medal, but at a competition. The Trumps tweeted about her, went viral. She got death threats. So many, in fact, that she had to change her name. That race, her finish was at 11.649 seconds. She broke that record by 0.24 seconds. Not even half a second. And that made news headlines everywhere. But what didn't make news headlines was shortly after she broke that record, a cis female cyclist named Kelsey Mitchell set the new world record at 10.154, nearly a second and a half faster than Rachel's. In 2019, her best elite finish, or her best finish in elite events, was 8th. In 2018, her best finish in elite events was bronze. And if you look at the chart on the screen now, her 2017 races, she finished first 3 times out of all those races. And plenty of those races, she didn't finish well at all. 20 out of 23, 78 out of 79, 61 out of 69, 22 out of 25. That's not dominance. She broke one record and now she's dominating the field. Her current elite ranking is 105th. I'm going to show you a quote of Rachel's. If you think I have an unfair competitive advantage, consider this. I lose most of my races. I won 5 out of 22 events in 2019. None of those I won were against strong international fields. The woman who took second place to me in the Masters World Championship sprint event, Dawn Orwick, beat me just days earlier in the 500 meter time trial. In the 12 times I've raced against Jennifer Wagner, who finished 3rd to my first place in the sprint event in 2018, she beat me in 7. Wagner has beaten me more times than I've beaten her head to head. How can I have an unfair advantage over her if she beats me most of the time? And why should my right to compete be contingent on not winning? That's a powerful statement. She loses most of the time. but she's considered to have an unfair advantage because she's won a couple of races. That's not dominating. That's not having a biological advantage. Now, the next athletes I want to jump to are transgender high school track stars Terry Miller and Andrea Yearwood out of Connecticut. This one has gained a lot of media attention because some of the cisgender female athletes in those high schools have filed a lawsuit because they say it's unfair to compete against Terry and Andrea. So I'm going to show you now a chart that shows Terry and Andrea's records, just a snippet of a little bit of their records, as well as Chelsea and Alana, two of the girls who are suing. As you can see, they all had regular first place finishes. They all dominated for the most part in their sport. Very talented. You may want to say, well, it's different high schools. They may not compete against each other all the time. And that's fair. But if you really break it down further, some of those matches between Chelsea and Terry, Chelsea won, including the championship. So is there an advantage just because Terry and Andrea were successful, even though their cis female counterparts were just as successful? I don't think that you can call that an advantage. Maybe they just wanted it more. If we look at another transgender track star, CC Telfair, the headline earlier said biological male is top-ranked NCAA women's track star. Okay, so she won the Division II 400-meter hurdles at the NCAA tournament in June of 2019. Division II. During that same championship tournament, she placed 5th in another event. And in March of 2019, at another NCAA tournament, she didn't even crack top 5 in any of her events. She doesn't consistently finish in the top 3 in her events, but yet she's top-ranked NCAA women's track star. Misleading headlines. When you read the articles behind the headlines, they don't go much further than the headline. They don't dive into, well, what are the records of these athletes? Are they really dominating? Is it really fair? It's important to know and to actually look, because you're going to consistently see they're not dominating or winning their sports regularly. Now, these have all been trans female athletes, so I want to flip the script. Let's talk about a trans male. In high school, in Texas, just a couple of years ago, his name is Mac Beggs. He hated wrestling against the girls. But because of the law in Texas, you have to compete on the gender of your assigned birth. So even though he's living life as a male, he was forced to compete against women in high school wrestling. Parents in Texas were pissed because their daughters were losing all of the time. He won 2 straight championships. His record in 2017 was 57-0. His record in 2018 was 32-0. Is that fair? First of all, it's degrading and demoralizing for him to have to compete against women. They're telling him he's a woman. He didn't want to be there, but he loved the sport. So now he's in college and he can compete against men. Why do we put restrictions on people? Just because they're different. We're not really researching and knowing what's happening. I took it a little bit further and I decided to dive into the population as a whole and how sports plays a part. So I'm going to show you a pie chart. So this is in 2019. This is the US population. 328.2 million people. Now, studies have shown that roughly 19% are active in sports. So 63 million. Studies have shown in 2017 that the trans population was around 3%. That's not everybody really saying they're trans that are. So I'm going to jump that number up a little bit and say 5%. It's roughly 16.4 million people who identify as trans in the country. If we bring in that same sports percentage of 19.3% into the trans population, it's about 3.2 million. Now I'm going to break that down even further. And we're going to say that 63 million We're going to cut it in half and say 30. That's because that research included things like jogging, hiking, going to the gym. Athletic things, just not sports. So we'll say 30 million, which I think is fair. If we think about middle school, junior high, high school, college, pros, semi-pro, rec leagues, co-eds, sports. So we should do the same to the trans athlete category. Cut that down in half and say 1.5 million. But I think that's a little bit wrong as well. I know a lot of trans people, and very few, if any, even watch sports, let alone care enough to play. So we'll say 500,000. We'll cut it all the way down and say 500,000 trans athletes out of 30 million in the country. That's probably fair. And you say, well, I don't think so because I don't hear about them in the headlines. It's because a lot of trans people play sports. You just don't hear about it because they don't have any kind of victory that the news wants to latch on to. So if we say 500,000 out of 30 million, I'm gonna show you the chart one more time. You see that little 10? That's how many trans athletes we hear about in the media. And that's an overestimate. I named 7. There may be a couple more with like a win here or there that was newsworthy. So how is that dominating? How is that creating an unfair advantage? Why are we creating laws that ban trans youth from participating in sports based on 10 headlines out of 30 million people? All this shows you is it's not about fairness and equality in women's sports. We're not trying to protect our female athletes. What this is transphobia, period. We're creating laws based on feelings and emotions, not on fact. When these legislators and governors are asked, and they've been asked every single time, name me one instance where this is a problem in your state, where a trans athlete has an unfair advantage and is creating problems. Not one, not a single one has been able to name an example because they don't exist. Trans athletes do. I know quite a few that actually play high school and college athletics. No one knows. It's not newsworthy. I'm going to show you another chart. This is a Harvard study. It talks about how parents believe their children benefit from playing sports. The importance and value of sports in our lives. Benefits their child's physical health. We all know that the United States is an extremely obese country. Get them outdoors. Gives the child something to do. Technology, video games, cell phone. Get them off of technology. Get them outside. Do something. They learn about discipline, dedication, how to get along with other people. Helps with future schooling, future career. Helps with their mental health and their social life. When I was growing up, I hated who I was and how I didn't fit in. I became an introvert, didn't have many friends, thought about suicide often. Sports, basketball in particular, is the only reason I'm here today. It's the only reason I had friends growing up. We're trying to take that away from trans youth because they're different and misunderstood. We're telling them, you can't go out there and make friends this way. You can't benefit from the exercise and getting outdoors. Not with your friends, at least. I talked about mental health. This next thing I'm going to show you was done by the Trevor Project, 2019. 35% of trans youth attempted suicide in the past year. 44% seriously considered it, almost half. 24% were threatened or injured with a weapon at school. 27% felt unsafe going to school. And we have politicians now trying to push laws that allow or require teachers to out and dead name their trans students. All this will do is cause further harm for the community, for those who are already isolated and alone and are being kicked out of opportunities like sports. How is that fair? What are we really doing? What message are we really sending to our kids? That it's okay to be a bully, to see people as different and other, not worthy of being a part? This isn't a solution to a problem that even exists. It's creating another problem. Just like when people message me and say, hey, how about you just start your own trans basketball league? I'm sorry, what? How is that a solution? Wasn't that a solution in the 1800s that lasted all the way to the 1940s with baseball? Telling Black people that they couldn't play baseball because of the color of their skin? That's not a solution. That's a problem, and it's called segregation. And it's telling people they're not worthy because of something that is different than you. And if we channel this energy that we are focusing as a country into banning trans youth, if we focus that into really caring about women's sports, really caring, we need to create change. I'm talking equality and equity. I'm sure you guys have seen this picture float around. This is from the NCAA tournament this past year when they were in the bubble. The dumbbells and the yoga mats are what was given to women as their training facility. The other side, with all the equipment, that's the men's. What message are we sending? We're saying we don't really care about women's sports. It's easy to see. And if you look at how money is spent toward the programs for female athletes in middle school, junior high, high school, college, and even the pros, female athletes get way less. I looked at the numbers for UConn, for example. If you don't know, UConn women have dominated in basketball for quite a while now. Men's program, not so good. Men's UConn football program, not so good. But if you look at their budgets, the men's football program gets a lot of money. The men's basketball team, a lot of money. The women's program, not that much money. People want to say, well, it's revenue. The men's sports bring in more ticket sales, more viewers. So you have to allocate that according to who brings in the revenue. I get that to an extent. But how are we allocating those percentages? Is it really equitable? I'm going to show you this. This is 2017. The WNBA have negotiated a new collective bargaining agreement. However, in the NBA, men are paid 50% of the revenue. And women, it was 20%. It's not 50% now. It's better, but it's still not 50%. So it's easy to know that women aren't going to make a $36 million contract like Steph Curry or LeBron James. They don't bring in the money. However, they should see the same percentage of revenue. They should be treated with the same dignity and respect. However, when I talk about the WNBA, either online or with people in person, I'm constantly hearing female athletes get made fun of. I'm told, well, middle school boys could beat the WNBA players. They're a joke. We don't care about women's sports, not the way we should. If we want to talk about, well, it's revenue, it's revenue, it's revenue. Percentage of revenue. Men bring in more. Let's look at U.S. women's soccer. I'm sure you know about that. There's been a lawsuit. Show you this graph. Men get paid more. We all know women's soccer is more entertaining and they're a lot better. They win more. Something that you don't see on this graph is that U.S. women's soccer brings in more revenue and viewership now than the men do. Yet, men still make more. World Cup bonuses per player. Women, $75,000 for first place. Men, $390,000 a piece. The women bring in more money, but get paid less. How is that fair? We don't care about women's sports. Let's channel that negative energy that we're putting toward trans youth and trans individuals because they're not really impacting sports. Let's focus focus it on what is impacting women's sports. And that's a failure to treat them with the respect that they deserve. I've talked about how biology is different for all of us. Gender isn't binary. This may still not answer all of your questions regarding trans athletes because of the rhetoric that goes around out there, but really break it down and look at it. Look at how these trans athletes are really doing in their competitions. And let's look at how cisgender athletes have biological advantages, but we don't care. And let's look at things other than biological advantages. Let's talk about socioeconomic advantages and how others can even just benefit off the color of their skin. We're not ready for those conversations, so are we? I think we really need to look at this as a greater whole. Quit targeting minority groups as being less than or other and not worthy of the same fairness and equality. One last thing I really want to leave you all with is there's a documentary that's going to be on Hulu in June. It's called Changing the Game. And it'll do more than change the game. It should change your hearts. I've seen it a few times. It is really well done. 3 of the athletes that I talked about in this video are on that documentary. It's about trans youth in sports across the country. I can talk so much. I can pull up facts and information, speak from my heart. So can other trans individuals. You can read all the headlines and misleading news as you want, hear the rhetoric, but nothing will change your heart like that video or that documentary. So I hope you're open to it. I really hope you watch it. Changing the Game on Hulu in June. Thank you guys so much for sticking with me for this whole video. I really hope the majority of you did. I love you guys. Bye.